The night is a cathedral of wind and the road is a thin hymn threading through it, a dark gray pickup carving two faint scars across a world erased by snow. Inside the cab, the glow from the dash dials paints Eli Warren's fingers a tired blue as he rubs them over the heater vent and hums the off-key ghost of his daughter's favorite song. The wipers clacking a metronome that can't quite keep up. Coffee sloshes in a dented thermos. A socket rattles somewhere in the toolbox and every small sound feels strangely magnified, as if the storm outside has swallowed the rest of creation and left him alone with his breaths and regrets and the stubborn decision to make it 10 more miles before the ocean curve. The windshield is a glass drum that the storm keeps playing, snowflakes drumming in frantic patterns that thicken and smear into glowing fog whenever the high beams catch them just wrong. Eli leans forward to find the road's grammar, reflective posts half buried under rhyme, a hint of crown in the asphalt, a shadow where the shoulder might be, and he eases the wheel with that patient touch locals learn, the one that says, "No sudden moves, let the tires tell you their truth, listen for the faint rumble of studded tread finding purchase in a white world that refuses to grip back." On the right, pine silhouettes climb in soft, dark waves, their tops lost to a sky that has no edges. On the left, the land falls away toward the inlet, an unseen drop that still broadcasts itself through smell, the mineral cold of sea ice and the iron tang of salt, so that even with the windows shut and the heater battling, Eli can taste the ocean and knows he's on the knife line where land pretends to be still and water pretends to be solid. He checks his speed, not trusting the number, trusting instead the tempo of faint hums and the way the truck's weight shifts like a big animal testing a frozen pond. Static chews the radio into tatters and then, like a shy voice from another room, a country ballad appears for 3 bars, steel guitar bending light, before the storm takes it again. Eli smiles into his scarf at the absurdity and the comfort of it, then flips the defroster higher and scrapes a thumbnail line through the condensation to keep sight of the lane. He keeps a steady 60 heartbeats per minute in his chest, counting without counting, sinking his breath to his corrections as if calm were a rope he can feed through a cleat and tie around the night. His phone buzzes on the passenger seat with the subtle threat of a hornet trapped in a jar. The preview glows. From Aaron, "Storm's bad. Stay in town, Eli." He lifts the phone, squints, sets it face down like a hot coal and laughs a single breathless syllable that fogs, because he's already past the last turnoff that would have made staying easy. The heater coughs and wins a small corner of warm air back from the cold, and he remembers a promise he made to himself after the divorce. No more chances left undone, no more hiding from the seasons, and this, tonight, in its ridiculous Alaskan way, counts. The tires give a little skitter in a crosswind gust, that sideways glide like a whispered warning, and he loosens his grip rather than tighten it, letting the chassis float for the half second it needs to recenter. Somewhere in the darkness a plow passes far inland, a muted thunder scraping the distant highway, but here there is only the soft crush of powder under rubber and the thin squeal whenever the studs meet crystal instead of grit, and he imagines the road as a ribbon held taut between invisible hands, one end tied to the town he left, the other to the inlet he must pass. He talks to the truck the way you talk to a skittish horse, low and regular. "Easy now, don't overthink it, we've done worse." The dashboard throws its cold constellations, engine, battery, and ABS light that flirts and then settles, and he watches for the small betrayals. Sluggish throttle response, delayed braking bite, a new rattle that could announce a frozen caliper. Instead, he gets steadiness, the good kind that feels earned, and for a moment he imagines he'll arrive, he'll pour soup into a chipped bowl, he'll text his brother a grinning selfie with a dumb caption about the weather not knowing who it's messing with. At the curve where the bluff begins to lift, the storm changes personality, flakes turning needle fine, blowing sideways in hard strings that sketch transient curtains across the lane. The edge markers vanish, then reappear, then vanish for good, and he must triangulate by memory. This guardrail dips just before the overlook, that stand of spruce leans like a broken comb, and he senses rather than sees the long, sweeping left that will carry him along the bay's lip. He feathers the throttle, feeling the tires whisper go smooth in a way that says ice, not snow. Beneath the music of weather is a deeper instrument, the ocean's low, steady moan reverberating through the ice shelf, a pressure song that rises through his floorboards and into his soul so that the world feels hollowed out under him. Eli swallows, tight throat protesting the dry cold, and keeps his movements small, as if any sudden gesture might knock loose the balance between motion and stop, land and water. sky and the black shape that lives under it all waiting for openings. The heater can't keep up now and the cab grows brittle at the edges, the kind of cold that sets its teeth into plastic and glass. He passes a snow-swallowed turnout where, in summer, tourists photograph the cobalt bay and the spill of mountains, and he whispers an apology to July as if the season could hear him. The storm muffles distance but magnifies detail. The feathered crackle of ice pellets against his mirrors, the tiny chime when one stray flake sneaks through an old window sill and melts on the warm side, the faint grind of packed snow in his wheel wells like a drummer brushing a snare in a jazz club that forgot to close. It's ridiculous and sacred all at once, this attention he pays to small sounds to keep the big dangers at bay. A gust punches the truck and the rear slews 6 inches. Reflex lifts his foot, the ABS chatters, the pedal pulses like a heartbeat against his boot, and he whispers a thank you to every winter he ever learned the hard way. The wheel wants to be held tight, so he gives it gentleness, pressure that says I see you without trying to dominate you, and the slide becomes a glide, becomes a track, becomes a new straight. His breath fogs again and he draws a smiley face without meaning to in the little clear oval he wiped, then wipes it away, superstitious of joy. Somewhere, a fairy horn ghosts through the white, a low animal call that could be real or the storm reflecting a memory back at him, and Eli pictures the shape of a vessel shouldering through brash ice, deck lights haloed, men in orange slickers laughing because laughter beats fear. He puts the image away like a charm in a pocket, something warm to hold if the road turns mean, and he murmurs to the empty seat, almost there, kid. Before remembering the seat is empty, the bear long since moved to a shelf, his daughter asleep 200 miles away in Anchorage under a different sky. A small orange reflector appears and flashes by, then another, farther, lower, wrong, and he realizes he's reading the road's artifacts like tea leaves. The drift pattern says the wind has been northeasterly for hours, the spindrift plume off the bluff says gusts will roll the truck right to left. The way the powder slumps at the lane edge says the plow either never came or surrendered early. He stretches his neck and it pops like ice snapping in a glass, a tiny relief that rings loud in the hush. His cab has become. The world narrows to a tunnel made of his headlights and the driven snow, and within that moving tunnel Eli feels strangely safe like a train on rails, only the rails are guesswork and the engineer is a man who can't afford to be wrong twice. He marks time by landmarks no one else would notice. The dark seam where the bluff's shale shows through, the 3 pines that survive near the salt, the shallow dip where a culvert lives under the road, and each familiar notch moves him forward a breath at a time until the notion of miles stops mattering and only the next clear decision exists. In the glove box, a crumpled knitting of notes and receipts shifts when the truck tilts, and an old photo slides into view. Eli, years younger, holding a toddler above bright tidapools as a gull stares with comic judgment. He doesn't look at it long, won't risk what memory does to focus, but the outline of that day, sun, laughter, the smell of kelp, glows faintly like the low battery icon of a flashlight he refuses to turn off. Outside, the storm tries a new rhythm, violent in bursts then thoughtful as if it too is deciding. By the time he reaches the long causeway that schemes the bay, the snow under the tires has compacted into something treacherously smooth, and the steering goes light in that deceitful way that makes you think everything is fine until it isn't. Eli tests the brake with a feather tap. 1, 2, feels the pedal's conversation, answers with a micro-adjust that keeps the truck dead center between banks that look soft but hide ice-chiseled curbs. He lowers the radio volume that's already almost nothing, because quiet feels like skill tonight. A fox crosses ahead, a quick red brushstroke in the monochrome, tail high, feet precise, vanishing between drifts as if swallowed by a trick. Eli laughs under his breath, surprised by the joy of that small life trotting its business through a storm that saps human judgment, and he feels sturdier for it. He reaches to touch the saint medallion his mother sent years ago, the one he keeps zip-tied to the column not for religion but for the memory of the hands that mailed it, and the metal is cold. Enough to bite even through the glove, a bright little sting that says awake. Then, as the inlet breathes colder and the world around him feels carved from the same white stone, a thought rises clean and sharp. Turn back. Not panic, not voice, just a simple sentence that lands with the weight of a hand on his shoulder. He considers it there and sees the options bloom like frost flowers on a window, back to town and a cot in the shop, forward to a rented room and a new job he keeps inching toward in fits, and he does what he always does when fear masquerades as advice. He checks his facts, checks his hands, checks his line and answers calmly, not yet. Ahead, the blizzard lowers its veil just enough that Eli can see the faint ghost of the bay beyond the guardrail. A slate field breathing, sections scumbled with wind and others glazed to black glass. The sight is both warning and promise. Don't drift, don't look too long, but know that men have crossed worse things than this with ropes and trust. And he lets his gaze return to the lane as he feels the truck settle. That half-inch of vertical float that means the shoulder is near. He brings the wheel a thumb's width right and the world, obedient for now, follows. Hook tucked into his chest like a pilot's checklist, engagement whisper in his head like a dare. He exhales slow and lets the heater's thin warmth fog his cheeks as if to prove he's alive. In the storm's loud silence, he senses how close all choices are to their consequences out here where ice pretends to be ground and ground pretends to be safe. And a single question hums in the dark cab with him like a second engine. If you were on this ice, what would you do? Turn back or keep going? The shoreline road narrows into a fragile ribbon suspended between white sky and black water, a place where the blizzard feels less like weather and more like an intention of the land itself, pulling every contour inward. Eli's headlights paint two sickly yellow arms into the storm, and the snow rushes toward him in frantic diagonal lines, giving the illusion that the truck is hovering while the world surges backward. Beneath his tires the hum changes, no longer the crunch of snow but a faint, glassy whisper, and he knows before he admits it that the asphalt has vanished under a veneer of ice forming faster than the plows can fight it. The guardrail to his left barely exists anymore, just a shadow of metal rising out of wind-packed drifts like a relic from a road that used to matter. Beyond it lies the inlet, an expanse of wavering silver black where slush plates collide in slow spirals and thin sheets shimmer like animal hides stretched over breath. He feels the ocean's pulse through the wheel, subtle but insistent, the vibration that comes from ice undergoing strain, transmitting tension like a low-frequency warning. It makes his ribs tighten as if the water were sending signals into his bones. He loosens his right hand to flex numb fingers and the steering column shivers slightly under his palm, the tires hunting for texture on a surface that has none. He senses that they've entered the kind of ice patch where friction becomes imagination, where motion is dictated not by throttle or brake but by whatever micro-tilt the land beneath chooses. He reduces speed with tiny feather taps, mindful that even breathing too sharply might upset the truck's tenuous equilibrium, and he keeps his eyes soft-focused, scanning for the slightest ripple in the snow that might betray a drift, a ridge, a thin crust waiting to give way. The wind shifts direction without warning, slamming against the driver's side in a long muscular push that nudges the truck a half-foot toward the guardrail. Eli counters with a slow, deliberate correction, refusing the instinct to fight hard, letting the wheels coast into a new track. The blizzard wraps the cabin in trembling white, whipping loose flakes like shards of mica, and the sound against the glass sharpens into a hiss that feels personal, as if the storm is whispering choices back at him, too far out, too late to turn around, too alone for mistakes. A sudden pocket of calm opens when he rounds a bend, and the snow eddies downward in slow spirals, revealing for an instant the nature of the road beneath. The asphalt is glazed, overrun by smooth, wind-sculpted ice, polished to a cruel sheen that reflects his headlights upward in ghostly bands. The truck glides with deceptive ease, the steering responsive in a way that feels wrong, too loose, like a boat rudder in shallow water. Eli inhales sharply through his scarf, his breath cold enough to sting the inside of his nose, and he recognizes the danger of false confidence blooming at the edge of disaster. He tests traction with a gentle swerve left, then right, letting the wheels taste the surface without commitment. The response is slow, syrupy, as if the truck is thinking before obeying, and he frowns at the hesitation because hesitation means ice, and ice means unpredictability. The heater whimpers another dying breath, frosting the corners of the windshield again, and he wipes an arc clear with his sleeve, watching the smear of light from the distant fishing docks pulse like a mirage through sheets of airborne white. His mind begins mapping the road from memory, rebuilding what he cannot see, the shallow dip in the curve, the contaminated runoff spot where summer rains erode grit into a slick strip, the break in guardrail spacing that the maintenance department never fixed. He imagines them lit beneath the snow like bones under a thin skin, the hidden structure he must read without sight. His shoulders ache from the posture of vigilance, tension curling up the back of his neck as if a cold hand is drawing lines there. Then comes the noise he dreads most, a faint chirp under the tires, the telltale cry of rubber losing argument with ice. The truck begins to slide sideways, not sharply but with a slow, inevitable drift like a tired animal yielding to gravity. He releases the accelerator, murmuring, "Easy, stay with me," as if the truck can hear him through steel and engine vibrations. The drift widens half a foot, then another, and the pattern of snow on the windshield tilts minutely, telling him he's slipping toward the bay. He steers into the slide, keeping his movements liquid, trying to coax the truck back into alignment with the invisible lane. For a second it responds, the nose straightens, the drift eases, and hope flares. But a second gust knifes across the inlet, catching the rear quarter panel like a paddle, and the truck yaws again, this time with more conviction. Eli feels the weight shift under him, a sickening diagonal redistribution that speaks of physics uncaring about human intent. The shoreline becomes a blurred streak in his peripheral vision, the guardrail appearing and disappearing behind crusted mounds of wind-packed snow. He tries the brakes again, softly, gently, but the ABS kicks in with a stuttering heartbeat, telling him the wheels are spinning free, gliding above the pavement like skates. Adrenaline surges hot in his veins despite the cold, and he tastes metal in his mouth as he tries to center the truck's mass without overcorrecting into a fishtail. The truck's rear end begins a slow, terrifying pivot toward the outer edge, that deadly choreography where momentum guides metal toward emptiness. Eli grips the wheel tighter than he should, feels the vibration of the studded tires scraping uselessly against the ice, and he whispers a curse swallowed immediately by the storm. Half a thought reaches for the handbrake, but he stops himself. Too much force and the rear will snap around entirely, so he holds steady, trusting the next few seconds to be kind. But the blizzard chooses chaos instead. A new gust slams into the truck, stronger than the last, angling downward like a giant's hand pressing from above. The front tires lose the last of their traction and the entire vehicle begins sliding diagonally across the lane, sideways, the world outside turning into a white blur streaked with gray. Eli tries to counter but the wheel spins with weightless resistance, the steering useless now. The truck's right tires kiss the snowbank at the road's outer boundary and the impact is soft, almost gentle, but enough to force the vehicle up onto the drift. The incline tips the cabin, leaning it toward the inlet with a slow, dreadful inevitability, and Eli's heart stutters as he understands the geometry. Upward on the bank means downward on the other side, where only the frozen bay waits 5 feet below the road surface. For an instant, the truck balances on the drift, suspended between land and the hollow sound of ice trembling under storm pressure. Eli hears a deep groan, a long resonant complaint rising from the frozen inlet below, like a whale moaning beneath the surface or a beam cracking in a burning house. That low frequency thrums through the tires, the seat, his spine, and he knows with the clarity only fear can provide, that the ice is thinner near shore, weakened by tides and runoff. He tries one last maneuver, turning the wheel left, easing the truck back down the bank, coaxing it to slide along rather than through the drift. For a heartbeat it works. The nose lowers, the truck shifts weight, but then a hidden ridge under the snow grabs the front tire, jerks the vehicle downward, and the entire frame lurches forward with a suddenness that snaps Eli's head back into the headrest. He gasps, gripping the console as gravity takes command. The truck drops through the crusted snowbank like a stone into powder, hitting the slush-covered ice below with a bone-deep thud that shivers the entire chassis. The headlights tilt, casting wild arcs along the underbelly of the bluff and the chaotic, wind-torn plain of the inlet. Everything becomes a swirl of movement, snow, water spray, the violent rotation of the cabin shifting from one unstable angle to another, and Eli's breath vanishes as the truck skids across the ice, slowing only when the surface begins to sag, groan, and cradle the vehicle in a terrible, sinking embrace that promises the next disaster is seconds away. When the truck lands fully on the ice, it doesn't feel like landing at all. It feels like being caught by something soft that wants to give way, a shocking absence of the solid jolt Eli's body was braced for, replaced instead by a rubbery, shifting bounce that throws his stomach into his throat. The steering wheel bucks once in his hands, then goes oddly calm, and in that unnatural calm he hears everything else. The brittle crackle of snow crust rupturing around the tires, the deep wet crunch of slush being forced aside, the slow resonant oomph of a flexing ice sheet trying to decide if it can hold the weight suddenly delivered onto its back. Time seems to slow, details sharpening, the way drops of melted snow on the windshield shimmer, the tiny trembling of the rearview mirror, his own reflection in it with eyes wider than he has ever seen them. The truck keeps sliding forward, carried by the momentum he'd built on the road, and the world outside becomes a low, smeared horizon of white and dark, shoreline above, inlet below, spinning just slightly off level as the chassis cants to the side. Eli's hands act before his mind does, yanking the shifter into neutral to kill the engine's push, but the decision is almost symbolic. Physics doesn't care about gear position now. Beneath him the ice voices its complaint, a chorus of pops and long cracks radiating from all four tires, vibrations rattling up through the seat rails into his spine like an incoming fever. The truck slows fractionally, its slide turning to a labored crawl as friction finally emerges from the slush, and then with a sickening lurch the front end dips as if the entire bay has inhaled. The hood angles downward and the headlights, still on high beam, punch into the ice directly ahead, revealing a nightmare map of fractures etching themselves outward in real time. Spiderweb lines race away from the truck's nose, jagged white fissures crawling under the surface like lightning trapped beneath glass. Water blooms darkly through a fresh crack near the front bumper, forcing itself upward in a frothy line that instantly freezes at its edges but keeps seeping from the center like a wound. Eli's seatbelt tightens against his chest as gravity pulls him forward in his harness, his body insisting that falling is happening even though the tires have not fully broken through. For a heartbeat, the entire truck hangs in a grotesque equilibrium, the rear half sitting on relatively thicker ice, the front axle already sagging into a shallow basin the vehicle's own weight is carving into the weak shelf. The cabin cants forward at a 10 maybe 15-degree angle, enough that loose objects begin to migrate. His thermos rolls from the passenger footwell, clanging off the console, and then slams into the dashboard with a hollow metallic thunk that feels disproportionately loud. A wrench skids backward, tapping the rear seats, and a small cascade of coins spills from the ashtray, tinkling down toward the base of the pedals, every clink a reminder that gravity has chosen a new direction. Eli's first instinct is denial. He slams his foot on the brake as if stopping the wheels will somehow stop the sinking. The pedal compresses with normal resistance, but beneath him the ice answers with a deep, drawn-out groan that reverberates through the floorboards, the sound of a gigantic door bending off its hinges. He hears it not just with his ears but with his bones, a low-frequency warning that makes his teeth ache. Adrenaline surges up his spine, and he releases the pedal in a panic, as if the truck's compliance in this situation is more dangerous than any mechanical failure would be. He's not in control, and the illusion that he ever was dissolves like breath on the window. Cold invades the cabin in subtle, insidious ways. The temperature seems to drop 10 degrees in seconds, his breath puffing out in thicker clouds, the air acquiring a damp edge that feels unnaturally close to his skin. A fine spray of slush has forced itself through the gaps at the base of the doors, spreading in thin, icy tendrils along the floor mats. When he looks down, he sees it glistening like a thin layer of crystal, already beginning to crust as the interior chill catches up. A thin hairline crack has appeared in the lower corner of the windshield on the passenger side, not from impact but from the slight, warped torsion of the truck's frame as it settles on uneven support. It creeps upward with agonizing slowness, a white vein threading toward the center of his field of vision. His survival brain finally overrules his shock. "Out," he mutters, voice hoarse. "Get out." He fumbles for the seatbelt latch with fingers that already feel thick and clumsy, the plastic buckle slick against his glove. The belt snaps back against the pillar, and he grabs the door handle, hesitating only a fraction of a second before pulling. The door opens 3 inches, grinding lightly against something outside, snow or ice, and the sound knifes through him. In the same instant, the ice under the truck answers with a loud, splintering crack that runs from front to back like a snapping timber, a clear cause and effect. Weight shifting, equilibrium disturbed. He shoves the door closed with a gasp, heart pounding so hard it shakes his chest. Movement, he realizes, is itself a risk. The truck settles another inch nose down, the angle increasing just enough that he has to brace his boots against the floor to keep from sliding forward in his seat. Outside, the storm continues its indifferent rage, snow blowing past in thick horizontal streams that look almost solid in the twin beams of the headlights. He notices, with a strange detachment, how the flakes change behavior as they cross the cone of light directly in front of him. Some bounce off the ice, skittering and dissolving, others vanish into the open cracks where the water is dark and restless underneath. The inlet is not a passive surface. It is flexing, breathing, responding. He snatches his phone from the passenger's seat, ice crystals crunching under his sleeve as he leans. His fingers shake as he swipes, thumb leaving damp streaks on the glass. No signal, no bars, no reassuring 4G, just a mocking SOS only in the corner, like a suggestion rather than a promise. He thinks of dialing anyway, some part of him needing to do something, but the emergency icon feels like a placebo right now, a button that might send his panic into the void and nothing else. For a second, he holds the phone up against the side window, as if the few extra inches of altitude might coax one phantom bar into existence. Nothing. The blizzard is a wall not just of snow, but of silence. He shoves the phone into his jacket pocket and gropes blindly behind the center console for the flashlight he keeps wedged there. His fingers close around the rubber handle and he tugs it free, nearly dropping it when the truck gives another subtle bob, the ice beneath shifting like a mattress under a heavy sleeper. He flips the flashlight on and a narrow, brilliant beam cuts through the cabin, bouncing off the cracked windshield before finding a path through. He aims it outward, sweeping across the ice field ahead, glossy, slick, fractured, and then upward toward the faint suggestion of the shoreline and guardrail above, now a shadow silhouette blurred by the storm. On instinct, he starts flashing the light in a pattern, 3 quick pulses, pause, 3 quick pulses, the closest thing he remembers to a distress signal from some half-forgotten movie. The beam struggles against the snow, scattering into a hazy cone after just a few yards, but he keeps at it, rotating his wrist, angling the light toward what he guesses is the open water channel where boats occasionally cross even in foul weather. He feels ridiculous and desperate at the same time, trapped in the surreal knowledge that if anyone is out there, if any vessel is crossing this inlet tonight, this tiny stuttering beam might be the only proof he exists. A new sound creeps into the mix, at first so faint he almost dismisses it as a trick of his rattled nerves. A low, far-off hum that is not the wind, nor the shifting of ice, nor the muted crash of distant waves under snow. It has a rhythm, a mechanical steadiness like an engine laboring against resistance. Eli freezes, the flashlight beam steadied in his shaking hand, and tilts his head, listening. The hum swells a fraction, then dips, fighting the storm. It could be a generator on shore. Could be nothing. Could be a boat. The hope that rises in him is sharp enough to hurt, but hope is not a plan, and the ice under his truck doesn't care about what might be moving out there. Another crack shoots out from beneath the front bumper with an audible snap, a jagged white line racing laterally beneath the surface like a lit fuse. The truck shifts again, not a drop this time but a slow, sickening seesaw, the rear left wheel losing a fraction of contact as the front right sinks deeper into the compromised shelf. Eli's stomach flips. The cabin tilts just enough that the coins at his feet slide forward another inch, tinkling against the firewall. The sensation is unmistakable. He is teetering. He grips the steering wheel again not because it will help, but because it anchors his hands to something. The leather is freezing under his gloves, stiff and unyielding. He imagines the truck from the outside, a dark oblong shape half caught in shattered ice, like a carcass in a frozen river, its nose plunged into a bowl of slush while its rear clings stubbornly to thicker ice. The mental picture makes his throat constrict. If the front breaks through completely, the truck will pivot downward like a lever, the cabin flooding in seconds. He has seen the videos. He has read the stories. Cold water kills faster than panic. He thinks of unbuckling and climbing into the back, distributing weight, maybe buying himself a few more seconds if the front gives way, but any movement that shifts his center of gravity feels like tempting fate. Instead, he inches his boot sideways and nudges the gearshift into park, an old, ingrained reflex that does nothing in this context but satisfies some core need to put things in place. The transmission clunks softly, a muted metallic complaint that seems absurdly domestic against the backdrop of groaning ice and howling wind. For a brief moment, he almost laughs at the contrast, a brittle, near-hysterical sound that never fully escapes his chest. His gaze snags on something small and dark half-wedged under the passenger seat, the corner of a worn brown shape peeking from beneath a stray rag. He frowns, leans over carefully despite the tilt and tugs it free. It's an old stuffed bear, one button eye scratched, fur clumped from years of being gripped by small hands, his daughter's toy, the one he thought he'd left on a shelf months ago. For a fleeting second the cabin is no longer a sinking box of metal but a memory-laden space. A toddler giggling in the back seat, crumbs on the upholstery, sunlight instead of this cold, feral darkness. "Hey, buddy," he whispers to the bear without thinking, and the absurdity of talking to fabric nearly breaks him. That's when he hears it, a voice that seems to lace itself through the wind, high and small, calling, "Daddy?" It's so clear that every hair on his arm stands up beneath his jacket. Eli whips his head around, eyes searching the back seat, the footwell, the dark corners of the tilted cabin where no one is. Empty. Seatbelt buckles sway slightly from the angle, nothing more. The rational part of his mind shouts that it's just memory, stress conjuring echoes, the brain using familiar sounds to fill in the horrifying silence. But the emotional part clamps down on the steering wheel tighter, heart racing, as if he might somehow shield that imagined voice from what is happening. He squeezes his eyes shut and forces a breath in, then out, counting silently, 1, 2, 3, as his therapist taught him years ago when anxiety used to come in different shapes. When he opens them again, the cabin is just a cabin. Tilted, freezing, precarious, but real. The voice is gone, replaced by the relentless percussion of snow against the windows and the distant, stubborn hum of that maybe engine, maybe boat, somewhere beyond his limited world of light. He tucks the bear into his jacket, zipping it inside against his chest, more for his own grounding than any symbolic promise. The cold bites harder now, exploiting every seam in his clothing. His jaw trembles involuntarily, words vibrating in his throat before he can form them. Okay, he mutters to himself, teeth clicking. Okay. You're not done yet. He lifts the flashlight again and starts a new pattern. Long sweep left, long sweep right, 3 quick bursts toward the dark horizon where the sound is loudest. The beam wavers in his trembling hand but still cuts a ragged cone through the snow, and he aims it higher, toward where he imagines a wheelhouse or deck railing might be, if a boat truly is fighting its way through this madness. Deep beneath him, the ice answers with another groan, longer and more pained, and the truck dips forward another fraction of an inch, enough that his stomach swoops as if cresting a hill at low speed. He feels the front wheels settle into something softer under the crust, like wet sand. Water is pushing up underneath, reshaping the support. The inlet is making a decision about him, and it is taking its time. The sensation of being suspended, of being alive in a moment that could end with the smallest shift, is so intense it burns away everything else. Out there, maybe a boat is coming. In here, in this narrow metal coffin resting on complaining ice, Eli understands the new reality. He is not driving anymore, he is waiting, perched between the weight of his truck and the mercy of the freezing bay. The hum that Eli has been clinging to as a half-formed hope grows clearer now, shaping itself into a laboring mechanical rhythm that surges and dips like breath strained against exhaustion. He freezes, flashlight trembling in his grip, and turns his head slightly to capture the exact direction of the sound. The blizzard tries to tear it away, shredding the frequencies into white noise, but the engine persists, steady, purposeful, too stubborn to vanish. It is close enough now that he can feel, rather than hear, the faint thrum of something much larger than his truck pushing through the ice-flecked water, a counterpoint to the groaning sheet beneath him. His heartbeat stutters, then sinks to the rhythm outside, that rarest of things in a storm, a human-made noise refusing to die. Far out in the inlet, the Marlin's ghost plows against the frozen chop, deck lights glowing through the swirling white like small moons smothered in gauze. At the wheel, Captain Jonas Reed narrows his eyes behind fogging goggles, the snow stinging any exposed skin with tiny electric shocks. He leans his weight into the throttle, coaxing the aging diesel engine harder than he ever should in temperatures like this. His breath forms a halo in the cramped wheelhouse as he mutters, "Come on, hold together," to both the boat and whatever unseen soul is sending desperate flashes of light through the storm. Jonas has been on this water for over 30 winters. Tonight, the storm feels personal, as if daring him to try. Below deck, Luka Petrovich braces himself near the bulkhead, one hand steadying a coil of rescue rope that he instinctively grabbed when Jonas changed course. The hull thumps repeatedly against broken ice plates, each impact rattling metal fittings and sending a tremor through Luka's boots. He can already imagine the kind of situation waiting out there, car off the road, through the shelf, someone trapped with minutes ticking down. His jaw tightens with every thought. "We shouldn't be this far in," he calls upward. Jonas shouts back, "Neither should he," and the answer settles over the cabin like a second storm. Luka nods, accepting the truth without liking it. On deck, Marisol Vega moves with the practiced grace of someone who has learned to keep balance even when the world tilts. She hunches into her red parka, frost collecting along the seams, and checks the tension on the bow line, making sure nothing will snag when they edge closer to the ice shelf. Her breath escapes in quick puffs as she tightens the straps on the spotting light mounted near the rail. The wind claws at her hood, flinging strands of wet hair across her eyes, but she ignores the sting. When she lifts the light to the dark shoreline beyond, she catches the faintest flicker of white, too steady, too deliberate to be lightning or reflection. Her pulse jumps. "Jonas," she yells. He's signaling. Inside the cab, Eli lifts the flashlight again, aiming toward where the engine noise now pulses with more certainty. His arm aches from holding it steady, his glove stiff with freezing moisture, but he keeps the rhythm going, 3 slow arcs, then 3 quick pulses, hoping the beam holds its shape long enough to be noticed. Snowflakes collide with the glass of the windshield, each impact a tiny white burst that distorts the light, but he refuses to stop. Come on, he whispers, breath fogging the cracked glass. The truck creaks under him again, a subtle but definite downward shift that tightens every tendon in his body. Time is thinning like the ice. Jonas brings the trawler's bow around, letting the floodlights wash over the fractured inlet where the snow parts just enough to show the tortured pattern of cracks. The light sweeps, and then lands on something metallic glinting through the slush, a truck roof half submerged in a spiderweb of failing ice. There. Jonas barks, adrenaline sharpening his voice. Marisol, spotlight, now. She swings the mounted lamp, and the beam stiffens into a bright column that pierces the blizzard. It cuts across the inlet and reveals the full horror of the situation. Eli's pickup teetering at a downward pitch, front bumper already disappearing into dark water, steam rising from the hood like the last breath of a dying animal. Luca swears under his breath, throat tightening with urgency. He grabs 2 lines, looping one around his waist in a practiced snap, and shoves the other coil toward Marisol. She nods, catching it with gloved hands, her jaw set in that quiet, fierce way of hers. Jonas adjusts the throttle again, angling the boat as close as the ice will allow, but not so close that the hull will crush through the thin shelf beneath the truck. The vessel groans with the effort, ice grinding along the steel sides, and Jonas feels each vibration in the soles of his feet like a countdown. Eli sees the lights and a sound escapes him, a broken exhale that feels both like a sob and a laugh. He presses the flashlight harder against the window, waving wildly now, no longer keeping a pattern. The beam jerks erratically as his numb fingers struggle to grip the cold metal. The truck responds with another low groan, sinking another inch, water flooding the front footwell in a gurgling rush. He gasps and draws his legs up instinctively, boots scraping against the pedals as frigid slush flows around the rubber mats. The cold clutches his ankles with the sudden violence of teeth. Panic rises fast and sharp. Jonas sees the movement inside the cabin and slams a fist against the console. He's alive. Luca, gear up. Luca already has the harness slung over his shoulders, tightening buckles so fast his gloves squeak against the straps. Marisol, anchor point. Jonas barks. She moves instantly, hooking the main line around a reinforced cleat at the bow and feeding out slack. The rope snaps taut, vibrating like a plucked string as the trawler adjusts against wind and current. The storm swirls around them in frantic spirals, but the deck crew moves like a single organism, each gesture sure, urgent, practiced through winters of danger. The boat bumps against a cluster of thicker ice, sending a shudder up the rail. Luca braces himself and tests the tension on his line with both hands, leaning back until he feels the rope's full strength. Marisol nods once, steadying the coil that will feed out behind him if he has to crawl across the shelf. Jonas slides the wheel into neutral, letting the boat settle gently into a semi-stable hover against the ice field. "We're as close as we're getting," he growls. "Storm's pushing hard. Luca, you go first. Marisol, you anchor him and watch the load. If that ice even whispers wrong, you yell." Eli's breath clouds the inside of the windshield as he watches the figures on the boat, blurry silhouettes through swirling snow, moving with purpose. Relief trembles through him in hot waves that feel almost like fever. But the moment breaks as the truck dips again, a sudden drop of several inches that jerks him forward against the dashboard, knocking the flashlight from his hand. It clatters against the footwell already filling with icy water, bobbing once before sinking into the dark. "No, no, no," he gasps, grabbing at the dash for anything to hold on to as the cabin tilts further toward the inlet. The entire front end shifts with a grinding crunch, metal protesting as if waking from a bad dream. Luca steps onto the railing, tethered only by the rope at his waist, and leans out over the edge of the boat. "Ice thickness," he shouts. Marisol sweeps the spotlight across the inlet surface, revealing the fractured grid beneath. 3 inches at best, maybe less near the truck, she calls. Luca grits his teeth, lowering himself onto his stomach like a soldier crawling into danger, distributing his weight wide. The ice creaks immediately under him, a brittle, splintering sound swallowed by the wind. Keep me tight, he calls back, voice steady but strained. Marisol plants her boots, feeding out rope with the tension of someone holding a life in her palms. The spotlight beam cuts across the truck again, illuminating Eli's terrified face through the cracked windshield. Luca drags himself forward, each elbow push sending delicate tremors through the shelf. The ice complains beneath him, tiny cracks spidering outward and recoiling at the last second. He measures every breath, every shift of his hips, keeping his body low and long like a shadow sliding over glass. The roar of the storm hides his heartbeat, but not the groaning that pulses beneath him, a living thing with patience and appetite. Eli sees Luca approaching and pounds once on the glass with a shaking hand. Please, he mouths, though his voice is lost instantly. Luca lifts an arm just enough to gesture. Stay still, stay calm, I'm coming. The reassurance hits Eli like a wave. His throat tightens with the pressure of tears he refuses to shed. He forces himself to freeze, muscles trembling. The water inside the cabin rises slowly, sloshing with every tilt. Freezing droplets climb up his jeans like unwelcome fingers. Jonas fights the wheel as the wind threatens to push the trawler sideways, the hull nudging dangerously close to the fragile shelf. Hold, damn you, he mutters, coaxing the engine to resist the gusts. He knows every second Luca is out there is a second that could be stolen by the ice. He adjusts the angle again, aligning the bow into the wind to reduce drag on the rope. Marisol, how's he holding? She squints into the white fury, reading the line's tension like a surgeon reads a heartbeat. He's good for now, she shouts, though her voice shakes slightly. The ice under Luca begins to moan more deeply, a long, bending sigh that makes him stop mid-crawl. He flattens his cheek against the frozen surface, feeling the vibrations in his jaw. Not good. He raises one hand and waves it in a slow circle toward Jonas and Marisol, a signal for caution, to be ready for anything. Then he inches forward again, slower now, moving like someone trying not to wake a sleeping predator. The truck looms ahead, the front end swallowed by a dark pool that keeps widening. Inside the cabin, the cold has sunk its claws fully into Eli's body. The water is now high enough to soak the cuffs of his jacket, numbing his wrists. His breath comes in quick, visible bursts. The storm outside howls in triumph as if sensing his weakening resolve. He clutches the stuffed bear inside his coat, squeezing it hard enough to deform the old, matted stuffing. Hold on, he mutters to himself, not sure if he means the bear, the fisherman, or the ice. His teeth chatter uncontrollably, and his vision pulses at the edges with creeping black frost. Luca reaches the back of the truck, finally close enough to feel heat radiating from the half-submerged exhaust pipe. He tests the ice with both palms, spreading pressure wide, and inches toward the rear quarter panel. Eli, he calls, the first time he tries the man's name, hoping the syllables will carry across wind and fear. He sees Eli's face jerk up in response. Wide eyes, pale skin, lips tinged blue. Luca raises his voice. I'm going to get you out. I need you to stay perfectly still until I tell you. Eli nods violently, too fast, but Luca accepts it. Luca digs his gloved fingers under the edge of the tailgate, testing stability. The ice beneath the truck groans again, a deep, warning shudder. Luca barely has time to brace before the front end of the pickup lurches downward another few inches, water surging as the hood sinks further. The entire ice shelf trembles under the sudden shift. Marisol gasps from the deck and tightens Luca's rope by instinct. Jonas slams a boot on the throttle to counter the sudden drag on the line. Luca's stomach drops as he feels the ice flex dangerously beneath him. But he doesn't retreat. Instead, he presses both palms flat against the truck body to spread his weight further, breath steaming through clenched teeth. Hang on, he calls to Eli. I've got you. I swear I've got you. Marisol watches him from the boat, grip white-knuckled on the rope, and for a moment the three of them, Eli in the sinking cab, Luca on the moaning ice, Marisol anchoring the line, are held in a frozen tableau of fear and resolve, lit only by the harsh beam of the trawler's spotlight and the indifferent fury of the Alaskan storm. Luca steadies himself with both arms braced against the sinking truck, feeling every vibration the ice pushes into the metal as if the inlet itself were breathing beneath him. The wind roars around his hood, tugging at the rope secured to his waist, the line humming like a tense violin string every time the trawler shifts against the swell. He keeps his weight wide, knees and elbows pressed low, the way old winter instructors taught him. Become part of the surface, not a point on it. The truck responds with a muted groan, its weight settling inch by inch, and Luca knows he has seconds, maybe a minute, before the ice decides to take the rest of the front end. He raises one gloved hand toward the windshield, signaling Eli to stay perfectly still. The man inside nods shakily, his eyes reflecting the yellow floodlight like frightened glass. The rear door is partially buried in wind-packed snow, but Luca reaches toward it anyway, hooking 2 fingers under the jamb and testing whether it will budge. The door resists, cold, swollen and distorted by the tilt of the frame, but a tiny gap appears, a breath of motion that gives him hope. He wedges his shoulder against the metal and pushes, not with brute force but with rhythmic persistence, letting each slow exhale drive another inch of movement. The hinge complains, shrill against the storm, but finally yields just enough space for Luca to slip a hand inside. "Eli, unlock it," he shouts. Eli clumsily fumbles for the manual slider, his hands trembling so badly that the latch clicks twice before finding purchase. Luca feels the mechanism release against his glove, a tiny but monumental victory. The moment he opens the door wider, the truck shifts again, a diagonal pitch downward that nearly sends Luca sliding forward onto thinner ice. He drops flat, pressing his torso against the surface, spreading his weight fast enough to catch himself before the shelf can fracture beneath him. The pickup's front end sinks another cruel inch, water sloshing against the exposed radiator, ice snapping in small brittle shards around the submerged tire. Luca clenches his jaw. "Marisol, tighten line," he yells. She reels in a foot of rope, anchoring him with both boots braced against the rail. Luca feels the tension lift him slightly upward, giving him the leverage he needs to keep from sliding into the forming slush pool at the truck's nose. Eli tries to move toward the back seat, but the tilt sends his leg plunging deeper into freezing water pooled along the floorboard. He gasps, a sharp, involuntary sound that cracks painfully from his throat. Luca sees him falter and quickly extends a hand into the cabin, palm open. "Look at me," Luca shouts through the storm. "Forget the water. Get yourself to the back. Slow, steady. Keep your weight low." Eli nods, teeth clenched so tightly that his jaw trembles and visible pulses. He crawls backward across the seat, elbows slipping on the icy vinyl, each movement deliberate but shaky. His soaked jeans stiffen instantly in the cold, the fabric freezing into rigid creases that scrape painfully against his skin. Inside the cabin, the world tilts like a sinking ship. The stuffed bear Eli tucked inside his jacket earlier digs into his ribs with each labored breath, but the pressure grounds him, keeps him from spiraling into panic as the water climbs to midshin. The air carries an almost metallic cold, sharp in his lungs, the smell of antifreeze and wet insulation mixing with the bite of ocean brine. His boots slide across the floor as he positions himself closer to Luca's outstretched arm, his fingers trembling violently from the cold. Every breath emerges as a plume of steam that hangs in the air before being sucked toward the cracked windshield by the storm's pull. Luca wedges himself halfway into the cab, but the angle makes it impossible to get both shoulders inside. He twists sideways, jamming his left arm through the gap so he can latch onto Eli's forearm. "I've got you," he murmurs, low but firm. "Move when I say." "Not before." Eli nods again, leaning his weight into Luca's grip, trusting the stranger as if their lives had intertwined years ago instead of minutes. Luca shifts his hips carefully, distributing weight across the ice. He knows the shelf beneath the truck is perilously thin. He can hear it flexing, expanding and contracting beneath their combined mass. He feels the ice's warning travel up his elbows like static. Not much time left. Marisol sees the truck list forward another few degrees and shouts, "Jonas, adjust angle, ice is thinning." Jonas guns the trawler's engine just enough to shift the bow away from a weak patch forming beneath the hull. The vessel groans, bowline stretching taut, but the maneuver gives Luca a clearer corridor of ice supporting him. Marisol watches every tremor of the rope with the precision of a surgeon, gloved fingers tightening on the belay device. Snow lashes across her face in horizontal streaks, freezing onto her lashes, but she doesn't blink, doesn't waver. "Luca, weight is shifting on your right," she calls. Luca adjusts instinctively, pressing harder into his left elbow, spreading himself wider. Eli's breath begins to come faster now, the cold drilling into his bones with a violence he hadn't anticipated. Luca sees the tremors rippling through his body, not panic tremors but hypothermic ones. "Stay with me," Luca says, inching backward to draw Eli closer. "Focus on my voice. We're getting you out." Eli clings to his arm, his fingers stiff and claw-like in their gloves. His lips move soundlessly, but his eyes hold a sharp, pleading awareness. Luca positions himself to pull, tightening his free hand around a stabilizing rung on the truck's interior frame. "On 3, he commands. 1, 2. Before he can say 3, the ice beneath the truck detonates in a sharp crack, the sound slicing through the storm like a rifle shot. The entire chassis jerks downward, dropping several terrifying inches as new fractures erupt around the front axle. Water geysers upward, splashing across the windshield in a violent sheet. Luca flattens instinctively, grunting as the rope around his waist yanks him hard toward the trawler. Marisol braces with all her weight, boots scraping across the deck until she locks into the rail. "Pull him, Luca, pull him now," Jonas shouts, voice hoarse through the wind. Luca reacts instantly, gripping Eli's jacket near the collar, hauling him upward with a burst of desperate strength. Eli scrambles with numb hands, boots slipping uselessly on the wet seat as he tries to lift himself. Luca hooks his elbow under Eli's armpit, using the leverage of his entire body to drag him through the rear door gap. Eli emerges slowly, awkwardly, his torso clearing the edge just as the truck's front bumper vanishes completely beneath the slush, swallowed like prey. His legs dangle inside the floodwater, but Luca pulls again, teeth clenched, tendons standing out in his neck as he fights gravity and the truck's sinking pull. Eli finally spills onto the ice beside Luca, his body collapsing fully, limbs heavy as sandbags. Luca grabs the back of his jacket and keeps him from sliding forward down the slope toward the forming pool. "Marisol, tension," he gasps. She pulls tighter, the rope biting into her palms as she anchors both men against the icy downgrade. Eli whimpers through chattering teeth, the first sound he's made that strips the last pretense of composure from him. Luca presses a steadying hand to his shoulder. "You're okay. You're out. Stay flat." Eli nods, pressing his cheek into the frozen surface, breath shaking in shallow bursts. But there's no time to celebrate. The truck lurches again, sinking faster now without Eli's weight in the cabin. The ice groans with a depth that suggests it is seconds from total failure. Luca throws one leg over Eli's waist, positioning himself between the man and the collapsing section of shelf. Marisol sees the danger and shouts, "Luca, back up. Now." Luca tries to inch backward, but the ice directly behind him spiderwebs, cracks racing like lightning. The rope at his waist snaps taut again as Jonas reverses the trawler just enough to shift pressure. The bow jerks, the rope pulls Luca backward a foot, then 2. Luca grabs Eli around the torso, dragging him with painful slowness across the unstable surface. Eli moans from the cold, but Luca doesn't stop. He only repeats, "Almost there. Stay low. Don't fight me," like a mantra. The ice shifts beneath them, sagging ominously, but Marisol reels them in hand over fist, her boots sliding dangerously close to the rail. Jonas keeps the boat at the perfect angle, matching their motion, creating a stable corridor of thick ice directly beneath Luca's path. Snow blasts horizontally across the spotlight beam, turning the rescue into a moment suspended in blinding white chaos. When Luca reaches the thicker patch of ice near the trawler's bow, he shouts, "Marisol, lift." She braces and pulls the last few feet of line with everything she has. Luca uses the final tug to roll Eli onto the safest part of the ice, then flops beside him, chest heaving, muscles burning. The rope around his waist digs sharply into his lower ribs, but he doesn't loosen it, not yet. Behind them, the pickup emits one last metallic groan before tilting entirely forward into the dark inlet, its rear wheels rising briefly like a creature gasping before it disappears with a thunderous splash beneath the ice. Cold spray erupts upward, showering Luca and Eli in freezing droplets. Eli gasps at the shock but remains conscious. Luca shields him with one arm, shouting at Marisol, "We need to get him aboard, now." She nods fiercely, already lowering the boarding sling, hands shaking from exertion and cold. Jonas maneuvers the trawler closer, risking the hull to broken ice because the alternative is leaving the 2 men exposed on a failing shelf. The vessel grinds, ice popping under the bow, but holds steady enough for Marisol to drop to her knees and reach out. Luca pushes Eli upward toward her, lifting him by the back of his jacket, muscles screaming from cold and strain. Eli stumbles into Marisol's arms, half collapsing against her chest, and she catches him with surprising strength, pulling him onto the deck. "You're safe," she murmurs, voice low but steady. "You're safe now." Eli's breath breaks into sobs he can't control. Luca climbs aboard behind him, aided by Jonas' outstretched arm. Marisol cuts the rope from Luca's waist, hands quick and sure. As Luca collapses onto the wet deck, chest heaving, Eli turns his head toward him, the stuffed bear still zipped into his coat. Their eyes meet, a silent, fragile connection forged on dying ice. Luca manages one shivering nod. "First part's done," he whispers. "Just breathe." But even as he says it, he glances toward the blizzard-chewed shoreline, where darkness hides whatever new danger the storm still holds. The deck shudders under their bodies as the Marlin's ghost fights the wind, its hull smashing aside small ice floes that crowd closer every minute, as if the inlet itself is trying to reclaim the space Luca and Eli have stolen. Marisol kneels beside Eli, gloved hands moving with a calm that hides the adrenaline winding through her veins. She brushes snow off his shoulders, watching how his breath shivers in uneven puffs. Hypothermia is climbing fast, faster than she would like. "Jonas, get us some cover, anything that buys us a minute," she shouts, raising her voice above the storm. Jonas answers with a grunt, spinning the wheel to angle the bow toward a thicker ice cluster that will act as a natural barrier. The boat groans against the shift, metal complaining, but it holds its line with stubborn loyalty. Luca drags himself upright, every limb screaming with cold fatigue. The ice on his parka crackles when he moves, forming stiff plates that fold awkwardly at the joints. He presses one palm to the deck to steady himself, the wood slick beneath his gloves, and looks back toward the inlet. The gap where the truck vanished is already closing, slush tugging inward like a wound trying to stitch itself shut. He feels a shiver run up his spine that has nothing to do with cold. "That could have been us," he murmurs. Marisol hears it but keeps her focus on Eli, gently forcing him to sit upright so she can check for injuries. Eli's vision pulses in and out of clarity. Faces loom and blur, Marisol's determined eyes, Luca's frost-rimmed beard, the rolling shadow of Jonas moving across the deck. His body trembles uncontrollably, each shudder jolting through him like a small shock. Yet somewhere inside the chaos of his senses he registers warmth, the press of Marisol's hands on his shoulders, the solid weight of the stuffed bear against his chest, the rough friction of the deck under his knees. The storm rages above and around him, but these small human touches pierce its roar. "You saved me," he rasps, barely audible. Luca huffs a breath that might be a tired laugh. "Not done yet," he replies. "Storm's still talking." Jonas slams the throttle forward just long enough to reposition the trawler and avoid a drifting plate the size of a camper shell. Ice screeches along the hull, the sound so sharp it slices straight through the wind. He feels the wheel fight him, jerking twice as the bow nosedives into a trough between two rising drifts of frozen slush. The spray that hits the wheelhouse windows turns instantly to rime, frosting the glass in seconds. He wipes it with his sleeve, cursing the storm under his breath. "Luca, Marisol, we've got incoming flows on the starboard side," he bellows. Luca whirls, sees the shifting field of ice trying to flank them, and gestures for Marisol to brace. A grinding impact rattles the entire vessel as one of the floes scrapes the trawler's flank. Luca stumbles but catches himself on a cleat, swearing under his breath. Marisol holds Eli steady, pushing him lower so he won't topple. The floe veers off, spun by the momentum Jonas forced into the hull's angle, but smaller fragments scatter across the deck in a clatter of frozen hailstones. The noise is deafening, a metallic rain of ice shards pinging across railings and boots. Eli flinches, eyes wide, overwhelmed by the sheer violence of nature behaving like a predator trying to finish a hunt it started. Luca moves to Marisol's side, slipping an arm under Eli's to help hoist him to his feet. "We've got to get him inside. Wheelhouse is the warmest place we've got left," Luca says, shouting over the storm's howl. Marisol nods, her eyes flicking to the shoreline where the bluff is barely visible, a jagged smear of darkness against a darker sky. "We can't stay out here long," she replies. Together they half carry, half drag Eli toward the cabin door, each step a struggle as the deck bucks under them. Eli tries to help, but his legs respond sluggishly, the cold robbing them of any precision he once relied on. Jonas watches the trio from the corner of his eye, adjusting the throttle to keep the bow angled safely. "Get him inside," he calls. "But stay alert, we've got unstable plates on the port side. Storm's pulling everything inward." Marisol yanks the wheelhouse door open, ushering Eli inside with a firm push. Heat greets them in a wave, weak but life-saving, coming from a small space heater affixed beneath the control panel. Eli collapses onto the bench seat, arms trembling too much to steady himself. Luca slams the door shut behind them, the sudden muffling of wind like the world catching its breath. Inside the wheelhouse, the quiet is comparative, not real. The boat still trembles under the storm's grip, and every shift of ice outside resonates through the cabin like thunder rolling under their feet. Eli leans forward, head in his hands, breath rattling. Marisol kneels in front of him, tapping his cheeks lightly. "Stay with me," she orders. "You're still cold, but you're here. Hear me? You're here." He nods, eyes unfocused. Luca shrugs off his outer parka, the steam rising from his damp thermal layers instantly fogging the frost-glazed window beside him. "We need blankets," he mutters, heading toward the small cabinet beneath the radio. Jonas doesn't take his eyes off the storm, hands gripping the wheel tight enough that his knuckles turn white inside his gloves. "You two keep him alive. I'll keep us afloat," he says through clenched teeth. The trawler surges forward as another heavy gust slams into its bow, and he counteracts with instinctive motions honed over decades. Every correction he makes feels like wrestling a giant with icy hands, but he keeps the vessel angled toward the deeper channel, trusting his muscle memory more than any instrument. The radar is little more than a flickering ghost, overwhelmed by snow interference. Marisol wraps a heavy wool blanket around Eli's shoulders, tucking it behind his neck with quick, efficient motions. His shivers soften a fraction, though they remain violent, deep tremors that shake the bench. Luca tosses a second blanket over his legs, then presses a heat pack against his sternum. Eli sucks in a sharp breath at the warmth, pain and relief intertwining. "Why you out there?" he stammers. Luca glances at him, then at Marisol. She answers simply, "Because we saw your light." Her voice holds no heroism, just fact. Eli closes his eyes, expression raw with gratitude. But the storm doesn't let gratitude last long. A massive impact rocks the trawler sideways, nearly throwing Luca off his feet. Jonas swears loudly. A floating slab had smashed into the port bow, splintering into icy shrapnel. Marisol throws an arm over Eli to keep him on the bench. Luca grabs the overhead rail and peers out the frosted window. The floe had been nearly the size of the pickup, solid, dangerous, and still drifting dangerously close in the storm's swirling currents. "That one's not done," Luca mutters, watching its jagged trail curve back toward them. Jonas fights the wheel again, teeth gritted, forcing the trawler into a narrow path between floating debris. "This is a minefield," he snaps. Storms shifting the plates faster than usual. His voice carries the calm of someone who has survived storms far worse, but even he feels a tremor of unease as another floe scrapes along the hull, sending a metallic groan through the cabin. Eli flinches again, instinctively reaching for the side of the bench. Luca places a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're good. Boat's tougher than she looks," he says, though the look he exchanges with Marisol betrays his concern. Then, through the chaotic dance of ice and snow outside, Marisol spots it, a narrow band of clearer water stretching ahead like a dark ribbon. "Jonas, break left, open channel," she calls. Jonas reacts instantly, spinning the wheel just as a gust tries to shove the bow the opposite direction. The trawler fights the transition, hull groaning, but Jonas pushes harder, feeling the boat respond with a loyal shudder. They slide into the open water, leaving the densest cluster of ice floes behind. The deck's vibrations ease in a way that makes all three rescuers exhale at once. Eli leans back, shoulders sagging, but the relief is short-lived. The moment they hit calmer water, the trawler lists slightly, revealing a new problem. The ice that struck earlier lodged itself near the bow, dragging at them like a weight. Jonas feels the drag instantly, the shift in how the engine labors. "Something's stuck under the hull," he mutters. Luca presses a palm to the cabin wall, feeling the reverberation. "We'll need to knock it loose or it'll slow us the whole way back." Marisol glances from Luca to Eli, unease darkening her expression. A sudden lurch knocks Eli sideways as the trawler rides up against the low, submerged ridge of slush. Luca catches him, bracing him against the bench. Outside the wheelhouse windows, snow streaks past so thickly it looks like the boat is diving through foam. Jonas adjusts the throttle once more, pushing harder into the open channel, trusting the deeper water to lift the hull free of whatever's clinging beneath. "Hold tight," he warns. "We're going to shake it loose." Luca closes his eyes for a moment, centering himself against the exhaustion dragging at his muscles. He glances at Eli, whose breathing has softened but not steadied. "You're doing good," Luca murmurs. "Stay with us." Marisol places a steady hand at the back of Eli's neck, grounding him. "His color's coming back," she notes, "but just barely." Jonas looks over his shoulder, jaw clenched. "Good. Because this storm's not done and we've still got to get back to shore." And beneath the boat, deep in the dark water, something heavy shifts against the hull, waiting to complicate everything that comes next. The trawler claws its way through the open channel, engine roaring like a cornered animal, the hull trembling beneath the combined assault of wind and ice. Jonas narrows his eyes at the radar, a flickering mess of interference that's more static than guidance, and instead trusts the instincts decades on these waters carved into him. A low vibration hums through the deck, a reminder that something is still lodged beneath the bow, scraping with each forward surge. "Hold together, girl," he mutters to the vessel, adjusting the throttle in careful bursts. The storm's fury hasn't eased. If anything, it tightens its grip, the air thick with shards of frozen ocean flying sideways at the speed of thrown gravel. Below the wheelhouse windows, Luca braces himself against the cabin wall, feeling the subtle, rhythmic drag of the ice chunk that remains wedged under the hull. Every time the trawler rides a swell or dips into a trough, the lodged piece grinds upward, jolting the frame. "We keep pushing like this, it's gonna shear a panel," he warns. Marisol glances at him, eyes sharp with calculation. She knows what he's about to suggest, and she hates it before he even says the words. "We have to knock it loose from the outside," he finishes, voice low. Marisol swears softly, glancing toward Eli, who, bleary-eyed, watches them with dawning dread. Jonas hears the exchange and doesn't hesitate. "We can't drag extra weight through this field," he says, gripping the wheel tight enough to whiten his knuckles. "That ice chunk will pull us into a spin the moment the crosswind shifts. We need the hull clean." Luca exhales slowly, nodding. He pulls his hood tighter and snaps his gloves, the gesture a silent acceptance of what's coming next. Marisol steps closer, blocking his path for a moment. "You just crawled across collapsing ice," she reminds him. "And I'll crawl across a little deck if it keeps us afloat," he replies with a tired grin. She doesn't smile. Instead, she grabs his jacket zipper and yanks it up to his chin with force. "Then don't die doing it." Eli tries to push himself upright, but his limbs are slow, the cold still eating at his strength. "He can't, he shouldn't," he murmurs, voice cracking. Luca rests a firm hand on Eli's shoulder. "I'll be quick," he promises. "Faster than the inlet would have been with you." The words aren't boastful, just true. Eli swallows hard, the stuffed bear pressing into his ribs again as he nods, unable to argue. Luca squeezes his shoulder once before stepping back into the storm, yanking the wheelhouse door open. The blast of wind that tears into the cabin nearly knocks him off balance before he even steps outside. The deck becomes a chaos of movement and sound as Luca emerges, waves surging beneath the frozen crust, ice plates scraping and crashing together, wind shrieking across the railings. He crouches low, gripping the cold metal with both hands as he makes his way toward the bow. The deck tilts under him, water sloshing between the grated planks before freezing mid-splash into brittle white crusts. The rope still tied loosely to his belt from the earlier rescue trails behind him like a ghost. Jonas keeps the trawler angled steady, aware that one misjudged shift could throw Luca straight into the churning black water below. Marisol moves alongside Luca inside the wheelhouse, tracking his progress through the frosted windows. Her heart pounds an uneven rhythm she can feel in her throat. "He shouldn't be out there alone," she mutters. Jonas replies without looking at her. "He isn't. He's got us." It's not reassurance, not really, but it's the truth as Jonas knows it. He adjusts the throttle again, keeping just enough forward motion to avoid becoming trapped between the drifting floes. Behind him, Eli forces himself upright on shaking legs, staring at Luca through the blurred window, each footstep outside mirrored by a stab of fear in his chest. Reaching the bow, Luca drops to his stomach, gripping the rail with one gloved hand while the other reaches beneath the hull edge with a steel hook. The cold slices through his clothing like knives, as if the storm itself is punishing him for defying its territory. He feels blindly for the obstruction, a solid chunk of compressed ice jammed against the keel, grinding like a stone in a joint. He positions the hook and pulls with every bit of strength left in his trembling muscles. The trawler lurches slightly and the ice chunk shifts but doesn't break free. Luca curses under his breath, planting his boots against the grate for leverage. Another wave pitches the boat, throwing Luca partially off the deck. His torso swings out over open water, the rope at his waist yanking tight. Marisol screams from inside, slamming a palm against the window. Luca grits his teeth, scrambles, and hauls himself back flat against the deck. Jonas snarls an order at the wind, "Enough!" as if he can command the storm itself to stand down. He steadies the boat with a deft adjustment of throttle and rudder, buying Luca a precious few seconds of stability. Luca uses them, hooking the ice chunk deeper and pulling again, muscles burning, veins standing out along his neck. Then he feels it, the subtle give, the shift of mass unsticking. The lodged ice chunk wrenches free, scraping violently along the hull as the trawler surges forward. Luca grins through chattering teeth, triumphant for half a heartbeat, until the freed chunk slams against the hull again, this time rebounding toward him like a battering ram. It hits the rail with explosive force, spraying shards across the deck like glass. Luca ducks, shielding his head. The trawler tilts sharply, caught off guard by the impact. Jonas fights the wheel, muscles straining, jaw clenched. "Hold on," he bellows. The deck's sudden tilt sends Luca sliding toward the starboard edge. He digs his boots into a great pattern, clutching for anything, but the ice coating the deck makes it a treacherous game. Eli, watching from the wheelhouse, slams his palm against the window in helpless panic. His voice cracks into a hoarse shout, "Luca!" though it's swallowed outside. Luca's fingers catch a mooring cleat at the last possible second, his entire body dangling over the water. His rope pulls taut again, but not enough to lift him, just enough to keep him from dropping fully into the dark. Marisol bursts from the wheelhouse before Jonas can stop her, sprinting down the deck with the fury of instinct. The wind hit her like a wall, nearly shoving her backward, but she leans into it, boots hammering the steel grates. She dives the last few feet, grabbing Luca's forearm with both hands. The jolt of her weight almost tears him free, but she refuses to let go, shoulders straining as she hauls him upward. "Don't you dare," she growls through clenched teeth, her face inches from his as the storm whips frozen spray across them both. Luca manages a breathless, shaking smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." Jonas steadies the boat with one last powerful adjustment, muscles trembling as he forces the vessel into alignment with the calmer channel ahead. The violent listing eases, the hull groaning as it settles back into a controlled glide. Marisol pulls Luca fully onto the deck and collapses beside him, both panting, both covered in ice and adrenaline. She presses her forehead to his shoulder for a second, just long enough to confirm he's there, alive, solid, before pushing herself up again. "Idiot," she mutters. Luca laughs weakly. Takes one. They scramble back toward the wheelhouse, Luca limping slightly, Marisol gripping his jacket. Eli meets them at the door, face pale but eyes blazing with relief. You made it," he whispers. Luca claps a gloved hand on his shoulder. "Still your lucky night," he says, though his voice trembles from cold and adrenaline. Jonas meets their eyes briefly, then turns back to the storm outside. "Brace yourselves," he warns. "We're almost in the clear, but not yet." And behind them, unseen beneath the swirling snow, the inlet gives a final distant groan, echoing the truck's last plunge, a reminder of how close they all came to joining it. The wheelhouse door slams shut behind them, muting the storm into a distant, furious roar, as if the world outside has been placed behind thick glass. Eli collapses onto the bench again, his breath coming in jagged bursts, the shock of what just happened rattling through his chest like aftershocks of an earthquake. Luca drops beside him, still panting, still dripping meltwater from his jacket, fingers twitching from cold and adrenaline. Marisol hovers over both men, shoving the blankets tighter around Eli's shoulders with brisk, focused movements that can't quite hide the tremor in her own hands. The cabin heater sputters, but the small wave of warmth it offers feels almost miraculous. Jonas keeps one hand on the wheel, the other hovering near the throttle as he guides the trawler through the calmer stretch of inlet. Behind his stern expression, relief threads through him like warm current. Relief that Luca didn't go into the water, that Eli is breathing, that the boat is holding steady. He glances once in the rearview mirror, catching the image of the three of them huddled together. Luca shaking life back into his arms, Marisol brushing ice from Eli's hair, Eli staring at nothing with that hollow, exhausted gratitude that only men rescued from the brink ever wear. Jonas exhales softly and turns his focus forward again. Eli's shivers intensify for a moment, violent enough that Luca instinctively grips his shoulder. "Easy, buddy," Luca murmurs. "This is the warm-up stage. Your body's trying to remember how to feel again." Eli manages a weak nod, his jaw trembling too hard for words to form. Every breath is a misty plume hanging in front of him. Marisol presses another heat pack against his chest, careful to avoid the icy patches still clinging to his clothes. "Keep breathing," she says softly. "Slow. Don't fight it." Eli clutches the stuffed bear inside his jacket like a lifeline, pressing it against the heat pack, its damp fur warming gradually. The storm outside hurls itself against the trawler's hull one last time, as though offended that its quarry has been stolen. Snow streaks horizontally across the wheelhouse windows, freezing on contact and layering into a milky frost that Jonas must wipe with his sleeve every few minutes. But the worst is behind them now. The ocean surface no longer churns with cracked plates of ice, and the boat rides more smoothly, the deck's vibrations easing into a steady hum. Marisol glances through the window, her breath fogging the glass, watching the shoreline come into faint view, shadowy, distant, but present. Safety has a shape again. Luca rubs his hands together vigorously, cursing at how stiff his fingers feel. "Haven't been this cold since Petrovich winters back home," he mutters. Marisol shoots him a look. "You almost went into the bay," she says, her voice tight with leftover fear she's trying hard to disguise. "Stop trying to make it sound like an old family anecdote." Luca raises both eyebrows in surrender. "I'm just saying, don't," she cuts in. Then after a beat softer, "Just, don't." Luca nods once, humbled. Eli watches the exchange through bleary eyes, something warm flickering inside him despite the cold. Proof that these people risked themselves for him not because they had to, but because it's who they are. A subtle warmth starts to seep back into Eli's limbs, painful at first, the burn of returning circulation like 1,000 needles dancing beneath his skin. He inhales sharply, fingers curling reflexively. Marisol notices immediately. "That hurts, I know," she says, steadying his hand in hers. "But it means your blood's moving again. You're doing good." Eli swallows hard, blinking rapidly to keep tears from spilling. I would have died out there," he whispers. Luca squeezes his shoulder again. "Not on our watch," he says, and somehow the confidence in his voice is enough to steady Eli's trembling heartbeat. The wind shifts direction outside, less violent now, and Jonas takes advantage, steering the trawler closer to the landmass rising like a dark constellation through the snow haze. The shoreline is threaded with faint orange lights, distant harbor lamps flickering through the white. Jonas nods toward them. 15 minutes, he says mostly to himself. Marisol hears it anyway, her shoulders lowering slightly as tension leaks from her posture. Luca leans back against the bulkhead, eyes half closed, exhaustion crashing over him like another kind of wave. The adrenaline that had fueled him across the ice now drains out in a single, trembling exhale. Eli lifts his gaze toward the window, watching the faint glow of the harbor pulse like a guiding star in the cold. Every part of him hurts. His muscles, his fingers, his chest where the seatbelt dug in during the worst of the tilt, but the pain feels distant, muffled by the overwhelming relief settling into his bones. Why did you come?" he finally asks, his voice raw and soft. Jonas answers without turning from the wheel, "Because that's what we do. Out here you help who needs it." Storm doesn't get the last word. Eli closes his eyes, letting the words sink into the spaces where fear had lived moments earlier. Marisol shifts to sit beside Eli, her shoulder brushing his lightly. "When I saw your light," she says, "I thought it might be a reflection. Or nothing. Storms trick the eyes." She pauses, choosing her next words carefully. "But something in me said to look twice." Eli opens his eyes, meeting hers. "Thank you," he manages. Her expression softens. Don't thank me yet. Still have to get you off this boat. Luca chuckles softly. He'll walk. Even if we have to carry him like a sack of halibut. Eli smiles weakly for the first time since the accident. The trawler hits a gentler pocket of water, rocking softly. Jonas uses the moment to radio the harbor. Static at first, then a faint, recognizable voice responding. Ghost? That you? Jonas exhales, relief escaping him for the first time. Yeah, we've got a survivor. Gear up the dock. Luca hears it and closes his eyes, letting his head fall back against the wall. Marisol lets out a slow breath, her shoulders finally unlocking. Eli presses a hand to his chest, feeling the steady, fragile beat beneath the stuffed bear. He whispers a quiet thank you to whatever force kept him alive long enough for the boat to find him. Jonas navigates the last stretch with steady hands, guiding the trawler toward the safety of the harbor lights. Snow still falls, but it no longer feels hostile. Just the normal Alaska winter returning after a night that had every intention of taking more than it did. Luca stands slowly, helping Eli to his feet, supporting his weight with a sturdy arm. Marisol positions herself on Eli's other side, forming a human bridge that steadies him with every step. Easy, Luca murmurs. Deck slick. Eli nods, legs wobbling like a newborn moose calf, but he moves forward, step by trembling step. The harbor grows larger through the frost-smudged windows, each light sharpening from a blurred glow to a clear outline. Eli's heartbeat steadies with the sight. Oh, I'm okay, he whispers as if trying to convince himself. Marisol shakes her head gently. You're alive, she corrects. And that's more than enough for tonight. He nods, swallowing the lump in his throat. Luca gives his back a reassuring thump, though softer than his usual. Jonas guides the vessel smoothly into the lee of the dock, letting the wind die around them. As the trawler eases up to the landing, the storm's howl quiets to a distant moan. Not defeated, storms never are, but receding, conceding. Eli stands between his rescuers, wrapped in blankets and trembling from more than the cold. The dock workers hurry toward them, voices muffled by snow masks and hoods, carrying more blankets and medical kits. Luca turns to Eli and says softly, Told you, first part's done. Marisol adds, Now comes the breathing part. Jonas throws the final line to the dock crew and shuts off the engine, the boat falling into a peaceful hum. For the first time since his truck tipped toward the inlet, Eli feels the weight inside his chest loosen. The storm is behind him. The ice is behind him. The darkness is behind him. He grips the stuffed bear inside his jacket, pressing it to his heart as the trawler settles securely against the dock. In the warm, flickering glow of the harbor lights, he feels something that had been absent all night, a fragile, flickering ember of peace. And as Marisol and Luca help him step out onto solid ground, he breathes the words he had been holding onto since the ice cracked beneath his truck. I'm still here. Days later, the storm that nearly claimed Eli Warren becomes just another piece of Alaskan lore, retold quietly in harbors, along breakfast counters, in the warm corners of bait shops where frost still clings to the boots drying by the stove. But for Eli, the world feels changed in ways both subtle and profound. He wakes each morning with the stuffed bear, his daughter's old companion, resting on the nightstand beside a steaming mug of coffee. The first few mornings he reaches instinctively for his phone, half expecting to see snow swirling outside the cracked windshield of his truck. It takes a beat before he remembers. The truck is gone, resting somewhere beneath the inlet's frozen skin. But he is not. He walks the docks every afternoon now, wrapped in a heavy coat lent by Marisol, boots crunching over the salted boards as winter light reflects off the water in glimmers of white gold. The Marlin's Ghost sits in its berth, steam rising in faint ribbons from the vents where the engine cools after morning runs. Luca is always tinkering on the deck, coiling a rope, sanding a rail, repairing something that probably doesn't need repairing. When he spots Eli, he lifts a hand in an easy salute. Eli returns it every time, the gesture now part of the rhythm of his days. Inside the boat, Marisol keeps a small kettle simmering on a portable stove, filling the wheelhouse with the scent of cinnamon and black tea. She serves Eli a cup each time he visits, sliding it across the small table with a look that is half stern, half warm. You should be resting, she says the first few days. Eli always answers the same, I rest better here. She rolls her eyes but she doesn't argue. On the fourth day she hands him a pair of fisherman's gloves, old but intact. "You can help Luca if you want," she says, pretending it's an afterthought. Eli accepts them with a quiet smile. Jonas remains the taciturn center of the trio, moving like a man built out of coastline and winter wind. He doesn't say much when Eli appears on deck, but his silence is never cold. It's an acknowledgement, one mariner to another, regardless of whether Eli identifies as one. One afternoon, Jonas simply nods toward a coil of rope near the stern. Eli understands the invitation immediately. Together they pull the line, Elias' hands raw beneath the coarse gloves, Jonas guiding him with small adjustments and gruff murmurs. The rhythm of the work warms Eli in a way no heater ever could. Word of the rescue spreads around Homer faster than the storm that caused it. Locals leave coffee gift cards at the boat's gangway. Someone pins a note to the dock rail, "To the crew of the Ghost, thank you for saving one of ours." Eli reads it 3 times, heart clenching each time. Another morning he finds a small lantern hanging from the boat's ladder with a carved inscription, "Light in the storm." Jonas pretends not to know who left it, yet his eyes linger on it for a full minute before he turns to his work. Marisol just smirks knowingly. A week after the accident, Eli stands at the bluff overlooking Kachemak Bay, the same road that swallowed him whole. Snow still blankets the ground, but the plows have carved clean lines into the asphalt, and new signage blinks with LED warnings. Unstable ice. Dangerous shelf. Stay back during storms. A reflective barrier has been installed along the shoulder, its metal surface gleaming cold beneath the weak winter sun. A crew works to reinforce a section of guardrail with steel anchors. Eli watches them, hands deep in his pockets, feeling the phantom tilt of the truck beneath him, the memory still sharp enough to raise goosebumps on his arms. He breathes deeply, letting the cold sting his lungs. The ocean moans below, quieter now, its frozen surface shifting in slow, majestic patterns. This view, this place should terrify him. Instead it grounds him. The fear still lives in the edges of his memory, but it no longer rules him. His life didn't end on that ice. Something else started there. He turns away from the edge and walks back toward town, boots crunching over packed snow in steady, sure steps. Back at the harbor, the sun dips low, staining the clouds copper and rose. Luca is on deck repairing a snapped latch. Marisol stands by the rail, arms crossed against the cold. Jonas checks the winch cables with a practiced eye. When Eli appears at the end of the dock, the 3 of them pause, each in their own quiet way acknowledging him. Luca waves with a grin. Marisol offers a nod that borders dangerously close to a smile. Jonas simply tilts his chin, but the gesture speaks louder than words. Eli approaches, the stuffed bear peeking comically from his jacket pocket. Luca notices and snorts. "Didn't think you'd bring your first mate today," he teases. Eli taps the bear's head. "He wanted to inspect the deck." Marisol laughs, brief but genuine, and Eli feels something loosen inside him. The sound warms a place deeper than the blankets ever reached. "Storm season's not over," Jonas says, glancing at the horizon where new clouds gather. His tone is neutral, but the implication hangs steady in the cold air. Danger still exists, always will. Yet so does readiness. So does response. So does rescue. Eli nods, stepping aboard with a confidence that surprises even him. "Then I guess I'd better keep lending a hand," he replies. Work becomes habit. Tying knots Luca teaches him, sorting gear Marisol trusts him with, helping Jonas check ice patterns drifting in from the open bay. Eli learns the boat's rhythms, its groans and sighs, its stubborn loyalty. He begins to understand why these 3 risk themselves for him. Out here, in this ruthless, beautiful place, survival is a shared effort, built on quiet courage and the unspoken belief that no one should face the storm alone. By the time twilight settles fully, the 4 of them stand together on deck, breath steaming against the dusk. The air is sharp, clean, honest. Eli looks out over the frozen inlet, the same place that nearly consumed him, and feels a quiet certainty rise in his chest. Not gratitude alone, but purpose. A commitment to the place, the people, and the fragile threads that hold life above the ice. He grips the rail with numbed fingers, the stuffed bear swaying gently in his pocket, and whispers words the wind almost carries away. "I'm still here. And I'm not going anywhere." If you were there on that deck, after everything, would you stay near the water, or walk away forever? Rate the courage 0 to 10.